Let's shift now to the pro-Palestinian uprising here in America. Look at what happened in D.C. this weekend. Lance, look at this. About 300,000 people, is what I'm told, gathered for a protest. There they are this weekend. They're in Washington, D.C., protesting Israel's invasion or whatever, however they want to twist this, that make it sound like it was all Israel's fault. Lance, here's my question as you're seeing this video. How does anybody get that many people together that fast to show up in D.C.? How does that happen?
It happens when you've got a lot of funding, Gene. And you know what they never expose? They never expose who's making all the signs that are all the same, who's funding the buses, who's funding the plane fare. What are the groups that are, I guarantee there are groups that are organized. There's about 25 different Palestinian type and left-wing groups that'll all show up there. But I think, the real story here that I think is encouraging is that the more outspoken and aggressive the pro-Hamas community is, the more it is fracturing the left. Not the right, the left, because the right is looking at this with 80% of America scratching their heads saying, who are these people? And they're in our country, and they're actually unified in their hostility against the Jewish people. And when you look at that, you say, my gosh, this is the America. I mean, their response is not much different than yours and mine. It's just that it's being made manifest. On the left, they've got a problem. Because the Jewish donors that have been strong in the university systems and in the Democratic Party are seeing clearly that this is an assault on their survival and their existence, and this is having a damaging effect on Biden, who is now under pressure from Obama and Axelrod and everyone else to waffle and step back on his support for Israel because they see this as a loss of their voters for the election cycle. So this is a really interesting moment. You're watching the left fragment itself right now.
Well, it's very interesting. Let's go back a few years to the last presidential election. What were we dealing with? About this same time, we had BLM, we had Antifa, we had riots in the cities and burning. It seems, Pastor Hank, to be just a little suspect coming into an election year that we're dealing with something else all over again. And Lance is right. We've seen photos of signs already pre-made lining the streets, just ready for the protester to come pick one up and proceed. You're not seeing the homemade signs with crayon and magic marker out there. You're seeing all the stuff that's well planned and thought out. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it goes back to remember those mystical bricks that showed up when they were protesting and burning down cities or buildings in the cities? Well, where did the bricks come from? Same way. Where is this organized, chaos coming from? It's obviously being funded from something and somewhere, and it probably has the hands of Soros somewhere in it. But I agree with Lance. I think he made a very powerful statement, and I think it's actually fracturing the left. I think it's hurting them, and I think many people are waking up and realizing, how do you support terrorism at the level of what we saw, and then to mobilize and even break down some of the gates, spray paint and vandalize. How about this? Mess with some of our historical history with some of the statues that they're tearing down. And where's the cry out and calling it insurrection? So obviously a lot of it is planned, it's paid for, it's funded, and I think more and more people are waking up and realizing, look, you can call it what you want, but when you take out and do the things that happen to the innocent in Israel, it's a matter of terrorism, and it needs to have the voice of justice and those that will stand up for the innocent at all levels. Doesn't matter what side you're on. We've got to stand for the innocence of people and not promote terroristic acts.
No, absolutely not promote terroristic acts. Rick, but, we're seeing red paint on the White House columns, on the gate. You've got, let's swap this. And if those people are all wearing MAGA hats, it would be January 6th all over again. We've got an insurrection in the streets of D.C. Go ahead.
No, I'm just disappointed in you and Hank not having enough faith that the president's going to have a speech. I'm sure tonight he's going to be at Independence Hall with the Marines all around him and the red lights, and he's going to give a speech about the threats to democracy, and there'll be lots of arrests, and the Washington, D.C. gulag will be filled. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe you guys are probably right. No, of course it's the same two-tier justice system we've been, screaming about for months and months and months here on FlashPoint. I think Lance and Hank are right. People see this and they're going, "Wow, that's our nation. We've got these kind of numbers in our nation that are marching to support evil and be against good. We've got a real problem." And so it's not only breaking up the financial support of these billionaires and others that have been supporting these universities. It's making parents go, "Man, I don't think I want to send my kids there. They're going to turn out like what all these problems that we're talking about." So this awakening that we've been talking about, this shift that we've been seeing in the culture, they're helping. This is actually going to help in the long run wake even more people up.
I believe that, but Lance, we got a Jean-Pierre is not Karine Jean-Pierre, because I like saying it.
You like saying that
almost as much as John Amanchukwu, but not quite. But they won't even. This administration will not even admit to the fact that they won't even call it what it is. They won't call it terrorism. They won't say Hamas. They will just say how we need the Palestinians and the Israelis. We need a ceasefire because let's just all take a break and let's take a pause.
We just need a pause
and think about it. Which you come do that to my house, some of my kids or my grandkids. We're not pausing. And I think Americans understand that. Right. We understand the Israeli. There's no pause here. Give them room to regroup and try again. They've already said that's what they're going to do. Lance, please make some sense out of it.
240 hostages are still being held by Hamas. They're in the underground tunnel system. You're not hearing any of the news talking about the fact that Hamas is holding on to Americans as well as Israeli hostages. So at some point, some bold journalist is going to write and say, are these protesters protesting in favor of the people that are holding Americans as hostage, holding Jews as hostage? And you're watching Biden, really, he's too weak to be able to endure much of this because Obama staffed his entire organization. Obama has come out. He's the most anti-Israel president we ever had. If you listen to Netanyahu talk about his experience with presidents, he's careful about calling names because he doesn't know if Obama and Michelle are going to be back in the White House at some point under her running for office. But he said he's had certain presidents he's had to deal with which were absolutely enemies of Israel. Obama's the one that empowered Iran. He wrote his love letter, a private love letter. We've never seen it, but a reconciliation letter trying to bring Iran back into the good graces of a relationship with America. And Iran is the one who's behind Hezbollah, Hamas, and Qatar and what's happening there. So I say again, this is actually going to fragment the Democratic Party. They have a problem because this is an out-of-control group of people. And I'll tell you what else is going to happen. It's going to make people look at Trump and his policy about immigration, and they're going to say, well, he had a point about making sure that people that come into the country are people you want in the country, rather than an open corridor where 8 million people can come in, feeding into that crowd. How many in that crowd, by the way, actually are American citizens? We don't know. They just have a number. They don't have the identity.
That's true. All right, well, look at this. The IDF put this out. Put yourself in their shoes. How would you feel living under the control of Hamas? Watch this.
Look at this picture. What do you see? At first glance, you might think this is a school or a hospital, but Hamas sees this as a legitimate place to store weapons such as rockets. Should rockets and children mingle in the same place? How would you feel knowing that next to the swings and slides on which your child regularly plays on, there is a rocket launch pad? How would you feel knowing that underneath the local hospital there are tunnels used for stockpiling weaponry, hiding murderers, and the planning of terrorist attacks against civilians? How would you feel knowing that your local authorities are committing heinous, unspeakable crimes and are currently hiding behind you and your loved ones? For the people of Gaza, this is not a hypothetical question, but rather the reality. Hamas has been using civilian areas such as playgrounds, hospitals, and mosques as hiding places for its terrorists and ammunition. While we see a school, Hamas sees potential terrorist infrastructure. While we see children, Hamas sees potential human shields. Hamas is so focused on attacking Israelis that it does not care about the Gazans who will get hurt in the process. Hamas disregards any human life, and if it continues to exist, civilians will never be safe.
All right, so Rick, you saw that video. I think it's pretty accurate. It's very accurate of what's going on in Israel for sure. But right here in Houston, we showed it just the other night, training in a massive way of this whole type of terroristic approach to Israel.
Yeah, Gene, two thoughts. One, you remember when we had Victor Marx on a week or so ago, and he talked about, listen, if you think Hamas is not here in America, you're a fool. You need to understand that there's going to be some real consequences for these border policies that we've had, and it's not going to be pretty. And we need to be prepared. All the more reason for people to train. And like Victor said, find community where you can have emergency responses when things happen, and find folks and be able to help the people in your community. But the second thing is, Gene, you watch that and you go, how do the Democrats in the Senate not agree with Mike Johnson for separating the funding from Ukraine and Israel? You watch that and you go, this situation in Israel and with Hamas in Gaza needs our immediate help and our immediate response. How dare them tie it back to Ukraine, back to the whole budget thing? I think that was a great victory for Mike Johnson to get that out of the House with it being separated and be able to focus on that one thing, which is how they should do more things in Congress anyway. And yet you have Chuck Schumer and these guys literally trying to tie it back to Ukraine. You watch that video and you realize just how different the situations are, which we've talked about here on the program. Ukraine, Russia is not the same as Israel dealing with Hamas, and yet the Democrats continue to try to tie them together.
So, Rick, let me follow up with that. So why is Schumer? Why are they that way? Is there?
Well,
go ahead.
Because they know the American people are sick of funding Ukraine. They're tired of the numbers that we're sending over there, the lack of accountability, all of those things. The American people realize that Ukraine is corrupt, Russia's corrupt. We don't really understand as the American people the difference between the two. Is Ukraine really our ally? Are they part of it? That whole thing's messy. We know Israel is our ally. We know what Hamas is doing is evil, despite those folks you saw marching in D.C. As Lance said, it's 80% of Americans that understand who the good guys and bad guys are in the Middle East. And so it's very clear to the American people. So Schumer knows if he can keep it tied, if he can tie the Ukraine funding to the Israeli funding, they can keep sending all this money and all this corruption to Ukraine. If they split it up, it's going to be much harder to answer for that vote in sending more of our taxpayer money to Ukraine.
Speaking of Ukraine, Lance, I'll give you the last shot at this one. First and last shot. Washington Times reports Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky rules out holding elections next spring and calls for unity in fighting Russia. We need to take a pause and not just cancel the election for now. Let's don't muddy the waters with an election process. Your thoughts?
Well, that's because he shut down all opposing journalists and any preacher that doesn't agree with his war. He's got one of the most dictator-driven nations in Europe right now, and he's doing it all under the guise of the expediency of war. He realizes that, interesting article came out this week. Israel is not asking for Americans to come down and fight for them. They know that they have to prove that they're militarily capable of protecting their own nation. If they ever want an Abraham Accord with other nations, they have to demonstrate they can do the job. They're asking for the weapons, they're asking for the intelligence, but they'll spend their own lives and spill their own blood. Not so with Zelensky. He wants Americans in there as fast as we can get there because he doesn't want to have to fight this war. He wants the United States to fight it for him. But it's not just Schumer. It's Lindsey Graham. It's all the war hawks on the Republican Party that are out to get this funding for their military investments and their military backers, because they really think the greatest evil we have on the planet is Russia. And Russia is not the evil. The evil we have is a corrupt government that isn't responsive to the priorities and needs of the American people. This is the year to fix it, and it's all coming to a head.
FlashPoint Live closes out 2023 in Pasadena, California. Join hosts Gene Bailey, Hank Kuhneman, Pastor Cheon, Rick Green, John Amatukwu, Abby Johnson, Charlie Kirk, Eric Metaxas, and Mike Lindell for this two-night closeout to the Truth and Freedom Tour. Thursday and Friday, November 30th and December 1st at Harvest Rock Church. Make plans to join us. Register today.